Iran Daily Briefing. Sunday, May 17, 2026. Iran says it will soon reveal a new plan for managing shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Al Jazeera reports that the plan includes tolls. Middle East Eye reports that Iran's vice president says Tehran will no longer allow military equipment intended for its enemies to pass through the strait. That connects directly to two other developments today: U.S. enforcement of a blockade on ships traveling to and from Iran, and renewed diplomacy around the U.S.-Iran ceasefire. Today is Sunday, May 17, 2026. The central story is the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran is signaling new rules for shipping. Washington says commercial vessels are already being redirected under President Donald Trump's blockade. Regional and outside governments are discussing the ceasefire. Following up on yesterday's episode, we were watching for three unresolved items. First, any Iranian response to the nuclear conditions reported by the BBC. Today's material does not confirm a formal Iranian response to those specific conditions. It does include Al Jazeera's report that Trump warned Tehran it would have a very bad time if a deal was not reached soon, and Middle East Eyes reporting that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Iran remains prepared to resume direct military confrontation with the United States if negotiations do not produce outcomes acceptable to Tehran. Second, prior Gulf security claims remain unresolved. Today's material does not confirm any prior Gulf security allegations. It adds a UAE ministry statement from a May 15th London meeting and a Qatar-Saudi phone call about the ceasefire. Third, we were watching for further U.S. Court or Justice Department filings in the case of Mohammed Bakr Saad Dawood al-Saadi. Today's intelligence items do not include new Court or Justice Department filings on that case. In today's episode, Iran's Strait of Hormuz plan, U.S. blockade enforcement, ceasefire diplomacy, the USS Gerald R. Ford's return from deployment, and a brief note on Iran's World Cup squad. The top story today is Iran's planned new system for shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Al Jazeera reports that Tehran has a new plan to manage shipping through the strait. Al Jazeera's Tawhid Asadi reported from the Strait of Hormuz on the plan. The reporting says Iran will reveal the plan soon, and that it includes tolls. Middle East Eye separately reports a sharper Iranian military-related position. Iranian Vice President Mohammad Reza Aref said Iran would no longer allow military equipment intended for its enemies to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. He also said Iran had previously allowed such equipment to pass through. Those are the Iranian positions in today's material. A forthcoming shipping management plan, tolls, and a stated refusal to allow military equipment bound for Iran's enemies through the strait. The U.S. position is appearing through enforcement. Middle East Eye reports that United States Central Command said that, as of May 16th, 78 commercial ships had been redirected to ensure compliance with the Iran blockade. A related item says Central Command described those redirections as part of efforts to enforce President Trump's blockade on ships traveling to and from Iran through the Strait of Hormuz. The economic effect is also visible in shipping volumes. Middle East Eye cites the Financial Times as reporting that only a few ships were crossing the Strait of Hormuz each day, compared with about 135 daily crossings before the war began. That is the operational picture. Iran says it is preparing a new framework for shipping. The United States says vessels are being redirected under a blockade. Reported ship crossings are far below pre-war levels. Diplomacy is moving alongside that pressure. Middle East Eye reports that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Beijing believes resolving tensions in the Strait of Hormuz requires a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire between the United States and Iran. Middle East Eye also reports that Qatari Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Al Thani spoke by phone with Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud about the ceasefire between the United States and Iran. And in a separate diplomatic item, Middle East Eye reports that Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif told The Times that Pakistan continued to play a mediation role between Washington and Tehran. Sharif also said he was optimistic that a second round of direct talks between the United States and Iran could lead to a lasting peace agreement. Tehran's own public line remains hard. Middle East Eye reports that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Iran remains prepared to resume direct military confrontation with the United States if negotiations fail to produce outcomes acceptable to Tehran. From Washington, the policy picture appears divided. Middle East Eye cites CNN as reporting that the Trump administration was divided between officials advocating renewed military action against Iran and officials favoring continued negotiations with Tehran. Israel is also part of the posture. Middle East Eye cites Yedioth Ahronoth as reporting that Israeli and US officials are continuing senior-level coordination as they prepare for the possibility of renewed conflict with Iran. The same source pack says Yedioth Ahronoth reported that Israeli assessments suggest Iran remains unwilling to abandon its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief demanded by President Trump. Al Jazeera reported that Trump warned Tehran it would have a very bad time if a deal was not reached soon. The source pack also lists Middle East Eye for this item. So the top story is not one move, it is a convergence. Iran is preparing new rules for the Strait. The US is enforcing a blockade. Reported traffic has dropped sharply. Regional and outside governments are engaging around the ceasefire. And Washington, Tehran, and Israel are all signaling that they are keeping military options in view. The concrete thing to watch next is whether Iran publicly releases the Strait of Hormuz plan described by Al Jazeera, and whether it specifies how tolls or restrictions on military equipment would be applied. Our first developing story is US military posture. Al-Monitor reports that the Pentagon said the USS Gerald R. Ford returned to the United States on Saturday after a 326-day deployment. Al-Monitor also reports that the carrier participated in combat operations against Iran during that deployment. France 24 reported that the USS Gerald R. Ford had been dispatched to the Middle East ahead of the outbreak of the Iran war. The source pack also lists Al-Monitor for that item. Taken together, today's reporting places the Ford in the broader sequence of US military activity around Iran. Deployed before the war, involved in combat operations, and now back in the United States after a long deployment. The thing to watch is whether US officials announce any replacement deployment or other force posture adjustment following the Ford's return. Our second developing story is the ceasefire diplomacy around the US-Iran conflict. Middle East Eye reports that Qatar's foreign minister spoke by phone with Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud about the ceasefire between the United States and Iran. Middle East Eye also reports that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Beijing believes tensions in the Strait of Hormuz require a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire between the United States and Iran. Pakistan is also positioning itself as a mediator. Middle East Eye reports that Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif told The Times that Pakistan continued to play a mediation role between Washington and Tehran. Sharif said he was optimistic that a second round of direct talks between the United States and Iran could lead to a lasting peace agreement. Those statements sit beside more confrontational language. Middle East Eye reports that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Iran remains prepared to resume direct military confrontation with the United States if negotiations fail to produce outcomes acceptable to Tehran. And Middle East Eye cites CNN as reporting that the Trump administration was divided between officials advocating renewed military action and officials favoring continued negotiations. The thing to watch is whether any party publicly confirms the timing or format of a second round of direct US-Iran talks. Today's material says such talks are being discussed, but it does not give a date. Our third developing story is regional messaging from the UAE. Middle East Eye reports that the UAE Foreign Affairs Ministry said Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan and Nigel Farage discussed the repercussions of what the ministry called unprovoked Iranian terrorist attacks targeting the UAE during a meeting in London on May 15, 2026. That statement is notable because it is official UAE language about Iranian attacks and because it appears in today's material alongside ceasefire-related diplomacy involving Qatar, Saudi Arabia, China and Pakistan. But it does not confirm prior Gulf security claims. Those remain unresolved. The thing to watch is whether the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar or Iran issue further official statements about Gulf security or the ceasefire. Our fourth developing story is Iran's domestic pressure. Iran International reports that Sharg Daily said on Sunday that severe shortages of opium syrup are disrupting addiction treatment across Iran. Iran International also reports that experts on its Eye for Iran podcast said Iran's internet blackout and the US blockade are pushing the country toward a deeper economic crisis. These are separate domestic indicators, one about access to addiction treatment, the other about broader economic pressure linked to the internet blackout and the blockade. The thing to watch is whether Iranian outlets or officials give further detail on medicine supplies, treatment disruption, or the economic impact of the blockade. A brief sports note. Al Jazeera reports that veteran striker Sardar Azmoun was not named in Iran's 30-man World Cup 2026 squad. The same reporting says the squad will be trimmed to 26 players by June 1. Al Jazeera also reports that FIFA held talks with Iranian football officials on the World Cup. Iran's football chief said FIFA offered solutions for each of Iran's concerns before games in the United States. The thing to watch is the final 26-player squad by June bust and whether Iranian football officials provide more detail on the concerns discussed with FIFA. At the start, we led with Iran's planned new system for shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Here is the fuller picture from today's intelligence items. Al Jazeera reports that Iran has a new plan to manage shipping in the Strait of Hormuz and that Tehran plans to impose tolls. Al Jazeera also reports that Iran says it will reveal the plan soon. Middle East Eye reports that Iranian Vice President Mohammad Reza Aref said Iran would no longer allow military equipment intended for its enemies to pass through the strait. Aref also said Iran had previously allowed the passage of military equipment intended to be used against Iran. On the US side, Middle East Eye reports that United States Central Command said 78 commercial vessels had been redirected as of May 16th to ensure compliance with the Iran blockade. Middle East Eye also cites the Financial Times as reporting that only a few ships were crossing the Strait of Hormuz each day, compared with about 135 daily crossings before the war began. Those are today's reported facts. Iran says new rules are coming, the US says ships are being redirected, and reported crossings are far below pre-war levels. In the next 24 to 48 hours, watch 3 items. First, watch for Iran to reveal the Strait of Hormuz plan reported by Al Jazeera. Today's material says the plan will be revealed soon and includes tolls, but it does not give the full text or operating rules. Second, watch for further US statements on blockade enforcement. Middle East Eye reports that United States Central Command said 78 commercial ships had been redirected as of May 16th to ensure compliance with the Iran blockade. Third, watch for confirmation of any second round of direct US-Iran talks. Middle East Eye reports that Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said he was optimistic such talks could lead to a lasting peace agreement, and that Pakistan continued to play a mediation role. Today's material does not give a date for those talks. Also, watch whether prior Gulf security claims receive official confirmation or correction. They remain unresolved in today's material. Today's episode covered Iran's planned Strait of Hormuz shipping rules, US blockade enforcement, ceasefire diplomacy, the USS Gerald R. Ford's return from deployment, domestic pressures inside Iran, and a brief World Cup update. We'll be back tomorrow with the next Iran Daily Briefing. For full written briefs and source-backed updates, check out the Iran Brief on Substack. Paid members can build multi-country monitoring across the countries they care about, with personalized briefings delivered automatically.